What is going on, super duper entrepreneurs, leaders, and influencers? It is great to see you all. For those of you all that are watching live on Facebook or YouTube, thank you all so much for joining us. For those of you all that are listening to us on our EQ for Entrepreneurs podcast and maybe watching on our YouTube channel, man, welcome. It is great to have you all join us. Also, wanted to thank you guys, man, so much for all the support, love, and encouragement that you all have provided and shared with us over 2020. We are so excited, man. We hit over 20,000 downloads on our podcast, and it's been really fascinating. For those of y'all that are maybe tuning in to our podcast around the world, man, welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us. It has been so neat to see all the different countries that have been involved in the EQ for Entrepreneurs, this emotional growth journey. Thank you guys so much for joining us. It has been super duper exciting. I've got my notes here, so if you see me kind of looking away from the camera, that's what I'm doing. Again, for those of y'all that are listening, that will be irrelevant to you guys. If you guys ever need either yourself or your company needs any EQ training, please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know at info@eqforentrepreneurs.com. All right. How did you survive 2020? How did you survive? I've got a list of a bunch of questions. So here's what I want you to do. If you'd be open to it, I've got a bunch of helpful questions to help assess from an emotional growth standpoint, a personal growth standpoint, how you did in 2020 for learning, not to judge yourself, not to beat yourself up, no guilt trips, no condemnation stuff here, strictly to learn and grow from. So if you can go back, if you have a pen and paper on you right now, that would be super awesome. Or you could jot down the questions that I'm going to be asking you so that you can go back through and listen to these questions and then pause after each question and answer the questions. Take the time to answer the questions. And I'm going to be sharing my answers as we're going through these questions as well. So if you are able to take the time to bust out paper and pen while going through these questions, this will help be a part of your emotional growth journey. It takes emotional awareness to answer these questions. And so if you are able to take the reflection time to answer these questions, that will help be a part of your emotional growth journey and increase your self-awareness, which is a part of one of the four main emotional intelligence domains. Okay, how well did you do in 2020? In other words, how would you rate yourself on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being great, 1 being terrible? Rate yourself, grade yourself on a scale from 1 to 10 on how you did overall in 2020. Again, not to judge yourself, not to beat yourself up, not to guilt yourself, no guilt trips here, none of that stuff. John Maxwell, who's a world-renowned leadership author, says that the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality. And I would add something to that definition. The first responsibility of a leader is to accurately define reality. In a leadership book called Leadership and Self-Deception, which I strongly encourage you all to read at some point, a company asked 10,000 of their executives how would they rate themselves, and 90% of those 10,000 executives rated themselves in the top 10%. Right? I'm not super great at math, but that math does not add up. So to be able to accurately assess and identify reality is very, very important part of leadership, and also, again, emotional growth and emotional intelligence. Okay, here's another way to help maybe add in some accuracy into some of your answers to these questions is ask a couple folks that are close to you how they feel you handled 2020 on a scale from 1 to 10. Again, 10 being great, 1 being maybe not so great. Next question, question number 2. What 3 to 5 lessons did you learn from 2020? Maybe about yourself or about others or just in general. for me, one of the big lessons for me was this year affected and impacted some more than others. And so, what my takeaway from that is a function of that are where people's emotional intelligence is and emotional health. So, the just from my perspective, my foxhole, the less emotionally healthy someone is, the greater this year impacted them. Now, again, that's a generalization, but that's my quick assessment just from my little foxhole here. And again, disclaimer, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist or a counselor, but from 3 to 4 very intentional years of growing emotionally, it just seems like the less healthy somebody is emotionally, the greater they are impacted by external circumstances. So for me, one of my questions is how can I be less impacted or affected emotionally by external circumstances so that I don't ride this up and down roller coaster just because it's raining outside, or I'm just being extreme as to make a point there. But that's just one question. Okay, question number 3. What were 3 things you did well in 2020? What were 3 things you did well in 2020? So my answer to those questions, I stayed intentional and consistent about my emotional growth journey. Number 2, I honored my 13-year-old daughter's boundaries very well. Number 3, I consistently did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu 5 to 6 days a week for 6 months straight. I've lost 40 pounds. So those are a handful of things I did well in 2020. Next question. What were 3 things you could have done better in 2020? For me, here are my answers to those questions. I could have been even more intentional about my emotional growth journey by making more time for reflection and journaling. Number 2, I could have spent more intentional time with the Lord and more time listening to Him. Number 3, I could have been more intentional at leading my family through daily devotions and conversation and discussion time. So those are 3 things that I could have done better in 2020. Next question. Who is someone you encouraged in 2020? I encouraged my awesome wife. I encouraged our daughter. I encouraged a buddy of mine named Zach Thomas. I also tried to encourage my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu professor, who is the owner and 4-stripe black belt of our gym, Jiu-Jitsu gym, who encouraged me in 2020. So who encouraged you in 2020? That's the next question. Who encouraged you in 2020? My wife, again, my buddy Zach Thomas, another one of my buddies, Scott Criswell, another buddy, Dan Ayers, one of my jiu-jitsu buddies, John Roy, one of my buddies from Australia, Alex Gill, my professor of jiu-jitsu, again at Prime Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Colorado Springs. We have a real close family, friends of ours, a family by the name of the Leonards. They're part of our homeschool, Classical Conversations homeschool group, have really encouraged me in 2020. And then the Gropners, who is our pastors are at Fervent Church, have also really encouraged me. There have been a number of others, but those are folks that have really encouraged me many, many times throughout 2020. Next question, what were 2 or 3 of the relationships that really fulfilled you in 2020? 2 or 3 relationships that really fulfilled you in 2020, which is different than the last 2 questions. So my wife, my relationship with my daughter, and then also, again, a buddy of mine at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, started to develop a really neat friendship with him. He's one of my coaches in Jits, a guy named John Roy, again, really great guy. Next question. What is a book or podcast that really encouraged you in 2020? A book or podcast that really encouraged you in 2020. For me, that book was Becoming a King by Morgan Snyder. Becoming a King. It's an excellent, excellent book. I'm still working my way through it. And honestly, I'm going to be working through it all of 2021 as well, in addition to some other books I'm going to be reading. Next question. What sermon really impacted you? For those of y'all that maybe have a faith background, love Jesus. And so what sermon, was there a particular sermon that really impacted you in 2020? I had one that really impacted me from a guy named Justin Gibbons, Gibbons. He's a big giant hunter, hunts big game, who's also a pastor. There was a sermon from a guy named Stephen Furtick, who heads up Elevation Church. And then I've had a number of sermons from our pastor, Pastor Garrett Grappner, from Fervent Church, that have really impacted me as well. And I need to go back and find those specific ones. I think that would be helpful just to have the specific links. Next question. What were 3 great memories you have from 2020? 3 great memories that you have from 2020. For me, I'm going to list a handful of them here. For me, being consistent in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu the past 6 months, losing 40 pounds, snowboarding with my family. We attended a shooting course at Front Sight near Las Vegas, starting and staying consistent with our podcast, EQ for Entrepreneurs, starting and finishing our very first EQ Accelerator course, Emotional Intelligence Accelerator course, reaching over 20,000 downloads in our podcast, doing a speaking engagement for one of my friends and college classmates, Colonel Eric Lopez, his U.S. Army recruiting command staff. That was great. We did a speaking engagement on emotional intelligence for him. It was great. Had a great time, great experience doing that. We cut, another great memory of 2020, we cut $90,000 from our income this year. We cut $90,000 from our income this year. Now you may think, how is that a good memory? There's a lot more to that story that we will share at some point, but it has actually been a tremendous blessing in a really neat way of why that's a great memory. I led a Bible study and discussion group in 2020, and I also attended a men's conference. That was a great experience as well for me in 2020. Next question, what are 5 to 10 emotions you feel when you're thinking about 2020? 5 to 10 emotions that you feel when thinking about 2020. Anxiety. Here's my answers. Anxiety, excitement, faith, rest, reset, trust, empowered. I would add fulfilling, encouraging, depressing are a handful of the emotions that I have felt about 2020. And at different times throughout the year, right? Some of those are more prevalent during some of the months. Some of those are more prevalent in other of the months. Next question. What are 2 or 3 strengths you observed about yourself in 2020? What are 2 or 3 strengths that you observed about yourself in 2020? For me, a few of them: resilience, tenacity, and consistency. Now, the consistency one, for those of y'all who don't know me, is actually a huge positive for me, because normally in some areas of my life I have not been consistent, and what I did not know was there were some emotional reasons, deep-seated emotional reasons, why I was not consistent. As I've grown and changed and improved in my emotional health, guess what's gotten better? My consistency in a number of different areas. So that's a huge one for me to be able to say consistency. And also my personality. Some personalities are more prone to be consistent than other personalities. My particular personality has more challenges with being consistent, and so I'm so thankful that I can honestly say that this year one of my strengths has been consistency. Next question. What lessons or priorities do you want to take with you into 2021? What lessons or priorities do you want to take with you into 2021? For me, here are a handful of mine. I don't want God to bless me with what I'm doing Rather, I want to do what he's doing and be sensitive to notice what he's doing. So rather than say, hey, God, this is what I'm going to do, I want you to bless me. No, hey, God, what are you doing? I want to be sensitive enough to be able to identify what he's doing and then be able to participate in what he's doing versus, revolving around me. Next one, increase my faith and trust and dependency in God. These are my answers now. Another one, continue to heal emotionally with my relationship with food. For those y'all that have seen a couple of my episodes, I've shared about some of my dysfunction with food. It was one of my emotional coping mechanisms. I had a very, very unhealthy relationship with food for most of my life because that was one of the coping mechanisms that I observed my father have. My dad he overate all the time. And only after my emotional growth journey have I been able to lose 40 pounds. So I'm not all the way healed yet though from my relationship with food. So I've got to still work in that area. Next one, provide the best possible quality products on assisting leaders, companies, and military folks to become as emotionally healthy as possible. So those are some lessons and priorities I want to take with me into 2021. Next question, what are one or two things you want to stop doing in 2021? What are one or two things you want to stop doing in 2021? Let me share a few of mine. Number one, spend less time on social media and make it more intentional time. So the time that I do spend, I want it to be more intentional. So spend less time on social media, and the time I do spend, make it more intentional. Next one, I want to stop operating out of my false self of people pleasing. I'm a recovering people pleaser addict, and so I want to really start getting to a place where I'm not making decisions from or operating out of my false self of people pleasing. I also want to stop seeking approval, validation, or affirmation from other people. If I get it, if I get affirmation or props or something like that from somebody, great. I'll be so appreciative, but I don't want to seek it consciously or subconsciously. I don't, because again, as a recovering people pleaser addict, I don't want to operate out of that place anymore or make decisions out of that place anymore. Next question. What are one or two things you want to start doing in 2021? For me, I want to schedule more intentional reflection time, not only personally as a man, but also as a family, to have some family reflection times. And then I also want to finish my book in 2021. I'm writing a book right now on all my lessons learned so far from my emotional growth journey, and I want to share that. I'm putting it in a book right now, and so that's why I want to finish my book in 2021. Next question: what were two or three activities that were really helpful for you in coping or recharging in 2020? What were two or three activities that were really helpful for you coping or recharging in 2020? So for me, praying and reading the Bible were really helpful for me in maintaining perspective and spiritual and emotional health. Next one, talking to my wife daily about our emotional growth lessons and our emotional growth journey was tremendously helpful for me. Next one, actually processing and not stuffing and avoiding my emotions and feelings. So allowing myself to identify and think about and process and feel those emotions that would come up. And then another thing that was super helpful for me in coping or recharging in 2020 was it has been Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It helps me out in so many different ways, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, so many different ways it's helpful for me. Next question. What is one question you want to take with you into 2021? What is one question you want to take with you into 2021? So here are just a handful. I'm not saying these are the ones that need to be whatever, but just some for me. Who am I becoming? Who am I becoming? Another one. How can I deepen my relationship with the Lord? How can I be more intentional about my relationships this year? How can I become more emotionally healthy this year? Who can I serve this year? What's one thing I can learn this year? What is worth mastering this year? What is worth mastering this year? Now, we will actually be hosting a live workshop on Zoom on Tuesday, December 29th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So that's again Tuesday, December 29th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Zoom. How to emotionally process 2020 and how to get and set emotionally healthy goals in 2021. So that's going to be December 29th, Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We'd love for you to join us. You can check that out at eqforentrepreneurs.com/2020. eqforentrepreneurs.com/2020. Again, if you're able to go back and listen to this podcast, listen to this episode when you're sitting down, so you can take time to pause after each of the questions and write down each of those questions so that you can reflect on them and answer those questions, that will be a tremendous value to you. Remember, emotionally healthy people help heal other people emotionally. And again, we'd love to have you on our workshop on Tuesday, December 29th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, where we will be discussing how to emotionally process 2020 and how to set emotionally healthy goals. And again, you can check emotionally healthy goals in 2021, and you can check out more details on that by visiting eqforentrepreneurs.com/2020.